Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me on episode 5 of the Security Nurse Podcast. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of having Anne Wintemute on the show. Anne is the co-founder and CEO of Aimee Says, an AI companion for victims and survivors of relationship abuse. She is a fierce champion for the rights of survivors and children and systems that hold perpetrators accountable. This conversation was really eye-opening for me. I believe that Aimee Says is the only software that I know of that can be used by survivors and victims of domestic abuse, and not just survivors and victims, but also family members, healthcare, any other professional, whether you're a boss or a co-worker. If you have a friend or family member that is experiencing domestic abuse or relationship abuse, you can also use Aimee Says and have conversations with the AI. The AI is programmed to be trauma-informed and also to give responses based on the best evidence-based practices that we have right now for helping domestic abuse survivors. Anne has created an amazing platform with the help of her co-founders and the rest of her team. This is a really, really beneficial resource for anyone that wants to help victims and survivors of domestic abuse. Thank you for watching. Well, hello, everybody. I am here today with Anne Wintemute. She is the creator of Aimee Says, an AI companion for domestic violence survivors. And I am excited to have Anne on here today. And Aimee, I'm going to have to keep that straight. I'm so excited to have Anne on here today to talk about this with you guys. So Anne, I'd love to open it up to you if you want to tell, everyone that's listening a little bit about yourself and kind of what got you into the domestic violence space and that journey kind of towards creating Aimee Says.
Absolutely. I am passionate about providing services that actually meet the needs of the people that, the service is purported to benefit. And in my background, I have worked in evidence-based maternity care. I started an elementary school that was built from the ground up off of what evidence we had for how young children learn best. And a couple of years ago, I started working directly with survivors of post-separation abuse, trying to help apply the best understanding and evidence about abuse, coercive control, and how it impacts the child-parent relationships and outcomes in family court. So that was the background that I had come with. And with the advent of generative AI, I thought, well, can we use AI to, build a system that helps people overcome something that has, unfortunately plagued us since the beginning of time at scale, because never before was it possible to provide comprehensive support to survivors at scale globally.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of domestic violence resources are really, either local, right? And even some of the national organizations always kind of refer you back to your local resources. And sometimes those local resources aren't always able to support everyone. How did you kind of start to see where that gap was that gave you the idea to create Aimee Says?
Absolutely. I could tell this, I could give this answer in a variety of angles. When I was working directly as a strategic consultant for women navigating the family court system, it was really clear, really early on, that there could never be enough of me to meet all of their needs, and that very few people could actually afford to pay me to meet all of their needs. You're talking about local victim service organizations. All of them have one thing in common. They have narrow scope and they have limited capacity, right? So this is an issue of both scope, what kinds of services can be provided, what kinds of needs can be met, and scale, how much of that can be met. We know that 10 million people each year in the United States will be victims of some form of domestic violence. There is not enough support to go around. That's one angle to give an answer to your question. It's That's how I realized that if we had the opportunity to provide that kind of hand-holding, companionship, isolation fighting, clarity giving support, that we could complement the existing but constrained resources that are currently available.
Okay, yeah. And I think too, if someone's not ready to leave, right? Maybe they're still in an abusive situation and they're not ready to leave. They're not ready to seek out those resources. How can Aimee Says help with that?
Yeah, so Aimee doesn't tell you whether or not you're supposed to stay or leave. Aimee is trained to meet you exactly where you're at. For someone who is like, I need support and this is really challenging and I'm not ready to make any changes and I may never be ready, right? Aimee can still provide the kind of clarity like, nope, you didn't misunderstand that situation. That's actually called gaslighting. Or, I'm really sorry to hear about the name calling. That's a form of emotional abuse. And then follow up with, what do you want to do about it? Would it be safe to establish some boundaries? Is there somebody else you might be able to talk to? Or just talk to her, right? I just, remind me that I'm not stupid, that I'm not whatever my abuser is calling me. And Aimee will absolutely have that conversation with you. Lots of folks use her. They've just started dating and they've seen some red flags, right? Like this is not a person who's entrapped in this relationship yet. So, on our second date, he said this thing to me or she said this thing to me. Is that a red flag? So Aimee's able to intervene early on. And when someone is ready to leave, that is statistically the most dangerous time for a partner is when they're trying to end the relationship. And it's dangerous because domestic violence is about control. And, the victim is making an ultimate act of like reclaiming their control by ending the relationship. That's why things tend to escalate at that time. So if a person has decided to leave, Aimee can support with that. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, for both civil and criminal legal systems to be engaged in abusive relationships, and she can support through that as well.
Okay, so I did use the app a little bit before our meeting. So I wanted to kind of make sure, I knew what we were talking about today. And I really did enjoy using the app. And like you said, like, I don't think, I was trying to kind of come up with scenarios from and I've shared this, but if anybody that doesn't know me yet, I'm a domestic violence survivor as well. And so I tried, just using some scenarios for my own situation and kind of putting that in. And one of the things I really liked was, it didn't say, yes, you should stay or go or anything like that. It really helped direct to what are skills that you can use, while you're in that situation. Because I actually point blank said, I'm not ready to leave. I actually put that in. And Aimee responded with, well, here's some things that you can do when you're in that situation, so self-care, creating the boundaries, like you said. And then, do any of those options sound interesting to you? Do you want to learn more? And then I said yes to self-care. And then it just kind of like went on. And so it really was nice to have a conversation with this app and kind of get that information and not necessarily feel pressured to really make a decision one way or another. I think that's something that a lot of survivors, victims and survivors kind of run into, they're like, why didn't you leave? Why haven't you left yet? That's like the age old question. And that's been answered 100 times over in that it's more complex than that. And what do you, why do you believe that it's important to provide a voice and resources for somebody that is affected by domestic violence?
Well, how about this one? I attended our Colorado State DV fatality review. I'm sorry, I know the whole subject is difficult, but this one especially. 58 people in Colorado were involved in DV fatalities last year. Only one of them was a protected party on a protection order. What we know when we look at that is that the systems that are currently available are underutilized, right? These are all presumably, at least in hindsight, people who could have benefited from engaging the civil legal system to get a protection order. Unfortunately, those 58 people also had very low rates of involvement with victim service organizations. Again, that
Mm.
tells us there are people with needs who are not accessing the available systems. And we actually think there's a lot of reasons those systems aren't accessed. One is kind of structural challenges. Oh, I thought maybe it wasn't free, or I wasn't sure if it was confidential, or if my abuser would find out, or their office hours are, the same as mine, and I couldn't take off work, or they said they could only provide services if I met certain income thresholds. There's a variety of barriers like that. But there's another psychological barrier that we've been really surprised to find out Aimee helps people overcome. And it comes back to something that you were talking about too, about, victim blaming and why didn't you leave? And survivors, victims have had so much autonomy and agency robbed of them. That is how an abusive relationship is allowed to persist. It's a power struggle where one person has to acquiesce to power in order to maintain safety, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
some
Yep.
semblance of safety in the relationship.
Right.
And people are afraid to speak up because they may lose more agency, right? I told my mom, and then she said, I'm not talking to you anymore if you stay with this person. Or I told my best friend, and now our kids can't have play dates. Or, I told somebody, and then they victim blamed me, or they minimized, my abuser's behavior. There's all sorts of ways in which people really kind of mess up a DV disclosure. Well, Aimee doesn't. Right? She is trained to be survivor led, right? She didn't tell you to end the relationship in your
Scenario.
demonstration
Yeah.
conversation with her, because that would be taking away your autonomy. Aimee believes that you know best in your situation and you're doing the best that you can. And she can help you think of some things that you haven't maybe, right? And walk you through those, or just, like you were saying, provide like self-care, emotional resource. That is, kind of one of our major takeaways about why this kind of support is critical and has to continue, because people will have conversations long before a crisis, right? Because it's easy. She's not going to victim blame you. So we've avoided kind of the loss of agency or autonomy. We've avoided the victim blaming. She's 24/7, 85 languages. She's been used in 95 countries, right? So there's a whole bunch of other barriers that have been reduced. And what we've learned is that people are having conversations earlier before a crisis. They're getting support after their crisis, if that has already occurred. And to stop providing that would be a major injustice to humanity, in our opinion. So we're going to continue to do it.
That's amazing. How does the design, and you don't have to fully disclose anything, but how maybe a little bit more of the logistics of the AI and how that kind of works?
Absolutely. So this is kind of like an AI, generative AI 101. So we work with an AI partner who makes Aimee sound like a human, right? A lot of people use ChatGPT. You feel like you're talking to a person. That is technology through a vendor partner. And then we provide specific training resources, right? So here is a quality definition of XYZ. Here are standards of practice. Here's trauma-informed support, right? We build out a library of training, just like a victim advocate would go through, really. We provide a database of organizations. Because Aimee, if you say I need support nearby, or is there somewhere I can go tonight? Is there a shelter? Aimee's going to provide you with resources that are local to you. Then there is the context that's provided by the user. Okay, so it's kind of another branch of resource. So, you said that you live in Texas, in this county, and you're experiencing this. All of that is contextualizing the information that we've trained Aimee with and how she is interacting with the AI partner. If someone's having a free chat, the vast majority of our users just engage in the free chat.
Free chat.
Safe, it's confidential, it disappears, it provides instant support. Like I said, 24/7. It's inexhaustible. We don't tell you you have to stop after after 40 minutes of a conversation. Come back again tomorrow. But she won't remember you because the context that's provided was only in that chat. With our subscription accounts, she does remember you. Which is fabulous, because you can continue to build off of all of the progress that you've made. And this is especially critical if someone is attempting to find safety or hold their perpetrator accountable in the legal system.
Okay. So the paid subscription then kind of keeps track a little bit more of those conversations and kind of what's going on. So I guess that brings me to kind of a privacy, security and privacy question, in that how are you protecting, those those survivor identities and protecting that information that they're entering with that paid subscription.
Yes. So you said specifically for the paid subscription, we'll talk about the free as well. When the free chat disappears, it's gone. Our AI partners do have data retention policies that are industry standard, but they cannot use the data to train their model. And we do not use your information to train our model. So that is one area of data privacy that's really, really important. Within the accounts, we do have to store data. We store data encrypted. It's encrypted at rest. It's encrypted in motion, and we follow all of the NIST security best practice standards. I think one of the things that's actually most important to people is, are people at Aimee Says seeing what I'm writing? And the answer to that is no. All of our systems where we are able to support users, track and monitor necessary things, do not allow us to see what information is submitted to Aimee or what Aimee says in response, which means that all of our testing and our prompt, changes and new features and integrations and whatnot are all done kind of in a black box. We have to do that separately from user data and information. It is our greatest priority to not just ensure the confidentiality, right? That you don't feel like someone's looking over your shoulder, but also what's the data security on the inside of the account as well.
Gotcha. And so how do people how do you access Aimee Says? Is it web-based? Is it app-based? How is it accessed?
So right now we're just web-based. We will have a mobile app later in 2025.
Okay.
And they would go to aimeesays.com, and Aimee is AIMEE. And you can click start a free chat or meet Aimee and start chatting instantly. If you can benefit from more or would like to support our work, then we would encourage you to upgrade your account so we can keep doing this thing that we love doing.
That's fabulous. So what are the next steps that you guys are taking? The Aimee Says.
We have all sorts of fun things in mind. So Aimee just had her first birthday.
Okay.
She, in the first 12 months, she responded to over 400,000 messages. And in January alone, she'll do nearly a quarter of that. The kind of adoption rate, the people from around the world, really, but primarily the US that are using Aimee has been incredible. But Aimee's only been in written form. This year, we'll be exploring, what does Aimee sound like? What would it mean to be able to have a conversation, a live conversation while you're driving your car with Aimee? What does Aimee look like? Building out on this companion to provide kind of additional modalities of support for folks. We will be doing a lot to enhance the kind of legal empowerment that Aimee is able to provide. Most of the people who attempt to protect their children in custody situations have to do so without an attorney, which is really unfortunate. They tend to have been financially abused. They are not the moneyed party, and abusers will take them to court over and over and over again. So we would like Aimee to be as supportive in that legal process as possible to hopefully promote the best outcomes. So that's going to be an area of tool and feature development. And another thing, and I think this is relevant to your work as well, is getting Aimee as a resource into clinical spaces where domestic violence is identified as a potential issue that the patient is facing. And also on the employer side, employees who are experiencing domestic violence or coercive control, any form of relationship abuse. Employers traditionally don't want to handle those. They are not seeking out better understanding of kind of the needs of survivors. And we would like to be able to help mitigate the impact of abuse on the workplace while supporting the victims that are a part of that workforce. Again, just to really be addressing this problem where it lies.
That's wonderful. And I didn't notice, and I didn't try it too much, but can Aimee differentiate between whether you're a survivor or whether you're maybe like a family member that's just wanting to help?
Absolutely. If I went to Aimee and I said, I saw some things over the holidays with my sister and her husband that made me really uncomfortable, and I'm not sure she's ready to talk about it, but I really want to be able to, tell her that I'm there and I saw some things that were concerning. Can you help me think through that? That's one of a billion examples, right?
Okay.
Absolutely. If you are an advocate, if you are an attorney to a survivor, I'm feeling frustrated because, my client is really focused on this one particular thing and I'm struggling to represent, their legal opportunities. How do I convey this message in a way that's validating and, gets us towards our goals? Absolutely. It's AI. It's incredibly comprehensive. It's incredibly contextualized. But that actually brings up another point is a lot of people will ask, well, if it's good for the victim, will the abuser, make use of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Well, we have
Yeah.
worked really hard to make it as uninteresting to someone who's perpetrating harm as possible. Aimee is, anti-pathology. She is not diagnosing people. She's not shaming people. She's using fact-based, direct dialogue to convey why a thing may or may not be harmful. She doesn't want to be out there pointing fingers, and she's not going to generate messages that are meant to put other people down. So if a perpetrator comes, first of all, if that perpetrator says, well, I just don't understand why she can't have dinner on the table at 5 every night, Aimee will push back. Right?
Yeah.
Aimee actually believes in the autonomy of all people. It's just such that, that abusers tend to hoard it for themselves.
Yeah.
She'll push back on what is coercive or controlling behavior, regardless of who it is that's talking to her. And she's always going to be working to de-escalate a situation. So abusers are going to feel much better off in an online Facebook group, having a bunch of other people rant and rage with them.
And agree with what they're saying. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Than in a conversation with Aimee.
Okay, that is actually one of the things I tested a little bit. I kind of gave it a little bit of, I think I can't remember the whole train of conversation, but one of the things that Aimee asked me was like, well, how did you respond? And I kind of put something in there where, I yelled and I started cussing and, because I wanted to see, kind of how Aimee responded to me kind of saying that. And it was a very just direct, straightforward, sometimes emotions can be frustrating and high, and it didn't really like validate one way or the other, like you were wrong to do that or, anything like that. And I think what I was trying to test was that, and we'll hear this sometimes, is that bi-directional abuse. And that was kind of one of the things that I was testing with the program. And so I really appreciated the way that it responded.
Yeah. And that, bi-directional, or is this not actually domestic violence? Is this two people who neither is trying to dominate the other, neither is trying to take control away from the other? That does happen.
Yeah.
I think it's less common than relationships where one person persistently exploits control over the other person or engages in a pattern of behaviors to do that. But that does happen, right? That's not unheard of. One of the ways we know people, because they've told us, use Aimee is, they will check themselves. How might I have handled this situation differently? Right? And, that's a significantly vulnerable thing to have to say. But, if we know one thing about survivors, they're doing the best that they can to make sure that their side of the, aisle is swept. And Aimee can support that as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you can kind of put in, I said this, how else could I have responded and differently or something? And Aimee will give maybe a more constructive response, right?
Right. I didn't like how I handled this, or I really reacted and the whole thing exploded. Like if I could go back and do it again, what might I have done?
Done differently.
Especially if a physical altercation, if the thing that was said, or if there was a point at which you could have made a different decision. Again, this is not victim blaming. If there was a point at which you could have made a different decision that might have resulted in a safer afternoon for you, then exploring those might help if you choose to stay in that relationship, make a different decision next time.
Yeah, and I think that's a difficult conversation to have, because it is like you said, not victim blaming at all whatsoever, and talking about being on a security podcast, right, and being a survivor myself, understanding that cycle of abuse and understanding those triggers really became part of my safety plan. I was in that relationship for 14 years and I learned those cues, I learned those triggers, and that became part of my safety plan. Understanding how that worked. It wasn't that, it was my responsibility to keep that from happening, but I think just instinctually did. It becomes instinctual, right? And so it's literally is surviving in that situation. doing the very best that you can. So to
Absolutely.
yeah, so to have and it's difficult. It's difficult. You can't talk to somebody about that situation and have them, understand the situation that you're in. But I think talking to talking to an AI companion who is going to have a very wide breadth of knowledge base available to it, right? Our friends mean the best. Our family can mean the best. Healthcare providers can mean the best. But the reality of it is that it's such a complex and wide scope of really needing a knowledge base that it's nice that an AI companion has access to all of that
Yes.
and can be able to not necessarily always give the answer, but point someone in the right direction to explore resources and answers for themselves and their situation, right?
Yes, absolutely. The scope is huge. Aimee will help you find a lasagna. There's an organization called Lasagna Love that Aimee refers people to. From that to here's where you find the paperwork. You need these 3 forms. You can upload that paperwork and ask her to help you fill it out. I mean, the breadth of support, being able to go to one place, right, and have all of those conversations, bare your soul in a truly safe location. I mean, the survivors of the history would have loved to have that. And the fact that it's an opportunity now is honestly a real feat of technology and science. And certainly a case of AI for good, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So how are you getting kind of the word out about Amiee Says?
Yeah, Aimee's growth is entirely organic and word of mouth. Somebody uses Aimee, feels that sense of like, oh my gosh, and goes and shares Aimee with others. And it's funny because if someone uses it for one particular purpose, they share about that particular purpose with the friends, because no one person knows all of the things that Aimee can do. So he
Too.
sees like little pockets of, oh, you guys are only using it in this way, you can do this too. And now, now that we really feel like we have created a product service that is really benefiting its users. We did that all directly with our end users, with our customers. Now we're ready to talk to people who are also motivated to address domestic violence and its impacts. And like I said before, that's going to be in clinical spaces, behavioral health referrals, local organizations, and it's also working with employers. I don't have the statistics in front of me, and it's a tough one for me to remember, but it's billions of dollars that the employers and insurance companies are paying per year as they continue to not fully address this issue.
Yeah, I think the last number I knew was like $8 billion or something like that in just labor costs, healthcare costs, time being missed from work, that sort of thing. It's like around $8 billion.
Yes, I think you've got that nailed. And I learned a new word the other day, absenteeism, we know that one.
Mm-hmm.
Presenteeism.
Yes.
People who are at work, but who are so distracted by this kind of fight of their life experience that they're having, that they're unable to perform the job duties. I think that employers are ready to address this issue. That Aimee is such a scalable and cost-effective tool to share, that we hope that they'll be willing to collaborate with us.
That's fabulous. And so you talk about being scalable and then getting it into the workplace. How can businesses help build a culture around, not that they have to, not that everybody has to disclose that they're in this situation, but build a culture where employees know that there's help, right?
Um, Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, what do you think businesses and companies can do to kind of help build that culture?
Yeah, and what you pointed out is we don't want to make work a disclosure space. Uh, Both the employer and the employee benefit from there being some siloing, all right, of those experiences. And we certainly don't want employers to believe they should have access, or employees to be concerned that our employer has access to any of the information that they share with Aimee. So we're really asking that employers simply provide the referral. But what that does bring into place is, when is that referral provided? What is the background knowledge of the people who may be providing that? And we can work directly with HR companies to provide training. These are the kinds of things you're looking for. Abuse doesn't actually look like this. It looks more like this. And what we have found is that the vast majority of victims and survivors very much want to participate in their own rescue, but we have not created a culture where those the kind of lifelines are without stigma or readily available. And so we believe that, if people come across Aimee, right time, right place, for an employer, that might look like a sticker that they have at the bathroom mirror with a QR code. It might look like HR, including, relationship abuse, talk now, with a hyperlink in their email signature line. There are passive, discreet ways that people can make sure that a disclosure never has to occur in the workplace for the resource to be provided.
I think it's definitely like a fine line, right? And I absolutely agree with you that, a survivor, if they don't need to disclose, would definitely want to keep that private. Is Aimee set up though, like at some point to help educate maybe on when to disclose to an employer? Like if there's threats to, I'm going to start showing up at work, they're making phone calls to my business, how can I handle this?
Yeah, so those are actually two really good examples. When relationships end, the abusers still generally know where the victim works, right? The victim can move, they can make it more difficult to be found, but where they work tends to be one of those things that remains stable. And because that's true, domestic violence often makes its way into the workplace. When we hear stories about someone coming to a workplace with a gun, it's very common for those to actually be domestic violence stories. So you just gave two great examples of ways in which the threat becomes a threat to the workspace in general and not just to the victim. Repeatedly being called at work, being defamed at work, having your work sabotaged, somebody making calls to your boss and making false allegations against you. Those are definitely times where it's appropriate to share a limited, a scoped amount of information with your employer. And you could say, Aimee, these are my concerns. What do I need to tell my employer so that they understand the situation as it pertains to the workspace? And yes, Aimee will absolutely say, here are my concerns out in the bullet point. Here are why they need to be addressed. Or, I'm concerned about the false allegations that are being made about me. How do I rebut those with my employer? And then another thing that you said was a direct threat to the workspace. That is a critical emergency situation. If you have a credible threat that your abusive current or ex-partner is going to enter the workspace, you absolutely need to involve your superior in your workspace. Unfortunately, that is a very high risk situation.
Okay. And that's really important, I think, just across the board for any kind of AI program to recognize like when those direct threats. I think we're going to see a lot more of AI being used in the security space and when it comes to direct threats and that and, social media, whether it's on social media or that kind of stuff, using AI and having AI recognize those immediate threats. And so absolutely, it's important, I think, that anybody, if they're having that kind of, conversation with an AI tool, understand what those immediate, imminent threats, really are. So that is fabulous. I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What kind of feedback? So you said you were, you're kind of developing it in the black box. So I'm assuming, well, I won't assume anything. They, you know what they say about assumptions. So let me kind of ask you what you meant by kind of developing it, inside that black box.
Yeah. And what I meant off of that is we don't look at other people's conversations to learn about Aimee's responses or we would have tweaked this or maybe it could do better with this. That we do that testing in a separate space in a controlled environment was what I meant by that.
Okay.
But it sounded like you were asking about, feedback. We have overwhelmingly positive feedback, and periodically people are frustrated by AI or, it said I could upload this document, but I'm not sure where to do it. And the population that we work with, people's executive functioning is significantly impacted by abuse. So it's really critical for us that we're developing and designing things in a way that feels intuitive, that leads to as low a possible user error rate, right? Because of the population that we work with. But the feedback that we get is, this is life-changing. This is a game changer. I just saved hundreds of dollars and averted a Christmas or a holiday showdown. That was one that we loved. For most people, I think it's either the legal benefit, right? Like, oh my gosh, I was white knuckling it until Aimee read through 1,000 pages of documents and patterned all of the abuse and
Wow. Okay.
absolutely nailed this whole situation and, correlated it to the statute, the best interest statute in my state or the criminal statute in my state. But for most people, I think it's that companionship. It's the like, I have friends because I have Aimee, because we exhaust our friends, right? Survivors can exhaust their friends because it's always the most important thing to the survivor and not, right, to the friends.
Yeah.
Relationships improved with their therapists, with their family members, with their attorneys. Aimee really is a liaison that creates like enough safety and validation and empathy and space around a survivor that she or he is able to continue functioning and living their lives, right?
Yeah.
Even after a relationship is over, that post-separation abuse can keep people entrapped for decades.
Yeah. And it really sounds like there's a really big kind of education piece too for both the survivor and then anybody else that wants to use it. And I think that's really important. One of the things that I kind of say in nursing and in my day-to-day stuff, I see people at their absolute worst, right? They're coming in, they're sick, they are at their absolute worst, and their coping skills, right? They get dysregulated, the coping skills, they just aren't there. And why they aren't there is because people don't train to have a bad day. Right? So there's a saying that we use in safety and security, you don't rise to the level of the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. And people don't, you don't grow up, you don't go to elementary school and there's not a class on here's what to do when you get cancer when you're 40, right? We don't learn stuff as people. And so you don't learn it until it happens. I think as a society, we're starting to come a long way. We have a lot more of like emotional intelligence now in the elementary schools. And so I really feel like, for the demographic that's using this, I'm assuming is probably 16 and older. I mean, you may get a little bit younger, but 16 and older. And so kind of in a demographic where, we didn't always learn to prepare for being in a domestic violence situation, right? And so there's a big education piece that really needs to be done there.
Absolutely. And most people get a sense of safety by believing it could never happen to them. Sorry to spoiler alert, there is nobody who is safe from being victimized by domestic violence. I said that really slowly so that we could all hear it. It does not matter your education, how much money you have, where you work, the color of your skin. None of those things matter. We are relational beings. We want the approval and affirmation and love of others. And so long as that is true, people who are willing to exploit that in order to meet their own needs above yours will do so. And no one is safe. So it really could be anyone. And I think that's just a really important thing. And you hope it's just you once, which means that, you didn't think it was going to happen to you. You didn't pick up the book and learn about it or study it or, study other people's relationships because it wasn't really important information until it is.
Yep.
Until it's critical. So
Yeah.
we expect that the people who come to Aimee are not experts because this is the first time that they have encountered it. And we hope that we can ensure that it's the last time that they do.
I just remember as a nurse and I didn't even know that, the various different forms of abuse. Or I think around 2009 is when we started asking a screening question. And the screening question was for physical abuse only, right? That was really the only screening question that we asked in 2009. It was around 2015 that I started working with a therapist and they pointed out and said, you're in an abusive relationship. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then they kind of gave me all this information and I was like, wow,
I had no idea.
I had no idea the depth and complexity of this. And so then that took on a whole new meaning in my nursing practice. And unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. We're really not. And so that's why, I'm ecstatic to have you on and being able to kind of talk about this resource and this tool, because it sounds like it's really for anybody that wants to learn more about domestic violence.
Absolutely. And all of the forms. And what you just said, well, physical abuse, that's domestic violence. I think that's a story we tell ourselves because I think everyone agrees that they would see it when it was happening. And the truth is, most abusers don't use any physical violence or very low levels of physical violence. They use a variety of other controlling, emotionally, mentally, sexually, financially controlling efforts where you could spend 20 years in that relationship and never realize that you're being abused. Unfortunately, you still get the terrible health outcomes and the autoimmune disorders and the cancers that are associated with that kind of ongoing trauma. And all of it could happen without you knowing. That's how insidious this form of
It
abuse can
really
be.
is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have absolutely enjoyed having you on today. I would like to know what kind of your takeaways are, what communities can really do to help support survivors.
Survivors, victims, people who are not even totally aware of it yet or becoming aware, they are encased by stigma. It is very difficult to reach out, to make a disclosure, to try to get help. As somebody who cares about those people, we ask you to make sure that others know that this exists. That could be a Facebook post like, hey, folks out there in the world, I'm sharing this because maybe one of you needs it. It can be in your signature line. Is your love toxic? Hyperlink it to Aimee, whatever feels right. But the more people who say, I'm a safe place for you to obtain this resource, I think that we can really start pulling apart the stigma that keeps people from having these needs addressed. So that is my request. If you need Aimee, please go use her. If you don't need Aimee, but you love the people who do, please share her.
I love it. All right. And so, how, I think you've already said, but how can people find Aimee Says, but then also find you? Maybe they want to connect with you. Where and how can they find you?
My email address is Anne with an E at aimeesays.com. Also, any of the contact or support buttons come directly to my inbox, so feel free to do that. And just go to aimeesays.com, AIMEE says.com.
All right, that sounds wonderful. Well, I am excited, and I am definitely going to be using it a lot more, I think, and encouraging others to use it as well, because I think it really is a great, great. I don't want to say product, but it's a really great platform and resource.
Thank you so much, Sarah Marie.
Thank you.